So I have the privilege to talk to you a little bit about first generation college students, and the conversation that I want to have really stems from some of my own dissertation research, also really some of the conversations that are happening within higher education more broadly about first generation college students. I think Laura Papano really summed it up the best in her recent New York Times article, First Generation Students Unite, that she said of the 7.3 million full-time undergraduate students enrolled in four-year public and private universities, 20% identify as first in their families to go to college. Let that number sink in just a little bit. 7.3 million full-time undergraduate students at four-year public and private colleges across the nation, 20% self-identify as first in their families to go to college. That's 1.46 million full-time undergraduate students across the country who identify as first in their families to go to college. The challenge is, the self-identified challenges that Papano wrote about in her article that are accompanied by research in the field is that for many of these students, they identify one of the greatest challenges is taking that that leap of faith and going to college. When you have a parent or a family member who's never gone to college before, the students identify that one of their greatest difficulties in going to college is explaining that college experience to their parents and family members. So today, during this Times Talk, we'll dive a little bit deeper talking about some of those challenges as well as perspectives of first generation college students. And then lastly, what can higher education do more broadly to really support these first generation college students as they navigate this transition into and through and then ultimately out of their college experience. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges though, when we think about first generation college students, is even just the process of defining it. There is no official definition of first generation college students. When you look across the nation or campuses, they might be the first to go to college. Is that first generation? Are you the first if one of the parents has gone to college but neither has graduated with a credential or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree? Does that make you first generation? What happens if my siblings went to college and graduated but I did not go to college as well? Or what if a grandparent went to college but a parent didn't go to college and now I'm going to college? There's a lot of compounding challenges when you think about how we even define or count first generation college students. For this session, we will actually use the definitions provided by the federal TRIO programs, who've identified that for eligibility for the TRIO programs, the federal government grants, a first generation college student is a student for whom neither parent obtained a baccalaureate degree. So that's generally what we utilize at Fort Hays State when we identify first generation college students, and that's what we will utilize for this session as well. Now on the flip side, I might use the term continuing generation college student, which before I did my doctoral dissertation research, I wasn't sure what the opposite of a first generation college student was, but in the literature and in conversation and practice on campuses, a continuing generation college student is a student who has at least one immediate parent who has obtained a baccalaureate degree. So we'll talk about first and continuing generation college students. So the first thing to note is when we even begin to think about first generation college students arriving on campuses, we know that there are pre-college characteristics that first generation college students face that may differentiate them from continuing generation college students. We, though, as higher education institutions, have an opportunity to really reframe these pre-college characteristics and shift that paradigm view to no longer view them as deficits or deficit thinking, but really use them as a sense of pride within our first generation college students. I put this visual up here because for many of our first generation college students nationally, they have self-identified that preparing for and going to college is a leap of faith into itself because no one in their family has done it before. If first generation college students do choose to pursue a post-secondary education, they either have lower or no aspirations, or they're more likely to delay their entry from K-12 setting into post-secondary. This lack of pre-college information is an opportunity for us within higher education to really think more broadly about our partnerships with our K-12 institutions and our partners, to really think about how can we reframe this deficit of a lack of pre-college information to support these students as they even take that first leap of faith and apply to college. When we think about their settings, their background, their academic preparation within the K-12 setting. Many of the seminal researchers within first generation college students, which has really only begun in the last 10 to 12 years, have identified that our first generation college students arrive to college with weaker math skills, they lack appropriate study skills, they have inadequate writing skills in comparison to their continuing generation college students from the K-12 setting. So we know that these pre-college characteristics may impede them on an enrollment or within those first few weeks or even days of classes. So that's something that we have to recognize and think about as we're thinking about how can we best support these first generation college students. I think the important thing though, and the very astute thing, is that first generation college students often recognize and acknowledge that they will need the assistance to overcome what they've identified as barriers to their academic success. We as higher education institutions will have to be charged to think differently about how can we respond to this need? How can we respond and increase this academic self-confidence of these students when they arrive for campuses? The important thing to note as a pre-college characteristic is first-generation college students have identified that their motivation to attend college and pursue a bachelor's degree is often to honor their family members. So how can we harness that motivation that they're arriving to college campuses and they're doing this to strive to honor their family members, because that serves as a source of strength for them as they're navigating the transition into college. So I'm using the word transition a lot here, and I think it's important that we identify what a transition is. So a transition is an event or a non-event that's perceived as significant by the student. It's something that's occurred that's either anticipated or unexpected, or something that was maybe expected to happen and does not. Successful transitions are integral to any student's ability to succeed and ultimately thrive in college and walk across the stage on graduation. When we think about a first-generation college student who has now applied to college and they're preparing to navigate the college environment, this transition from high school to college has been identified as the most difficult transition that a first-generation college student will make throughout their entire collegiate life cycle, from thinking about going to college, applying to college, being in college and graduating. That transition from high school to college is the most difficult transition. There are a variety of stressors that first-generation college students face as they navigate this. One of the primary stressors is what's identified as social class identity reformation. They feel like they're straddling two different cultures, their family culture and this new environment in college. How are they supposed to, they struggle in terms of the balance of family and home life, explaining their academic stressors or explaining what they're doing in the classroom to parents and family members who are supportive, are routinely supportive, but struggle to understand. They don't have that person. The Papano article from the New York Times said, one first-generation college student said, when I send a text home because I'm struggling on a topic for a paper for a class, or I'm thinking about changing my major, well, my parents are very supportive. They don't know the right question to ask, or the right directions to point me in, or who might be the appropriate resources on campus. And that first-generation college student said, I feel at a disadvantage compared to my other continuing generation college student peers who has a parent that says, call your advisor, visit the registrar's office. This might be a great paper topic for your Comp 1 paper, whatever that might be. One of the interesting pieces in this transition to higher education are the types of academic courses that first-generation college students find most stressful. Continuing generation college students, those students who have at least one parent with a bachelor's degree, identified that they thrive in courses of a more abstract nature. First-generation college students, though, self-identified that they prefer courses that are much more concrete in nature. Now think about the classes if you're a student that you're in, or a faculty member if you teach. If those courses are much more of a concrete or abstract in nature and challenging our students to think more broadly, our first-generation students might be at a disadvantage there when we think about they prefer and they do thrive more in courses of a concrete nature. Faculty engagement is an additional challenge for first-generation college students. We've identified that first-generation college students sometimes feel that they lack that academic self-confidence when they arrive to college. And in doing so, even the process of going up and having a conversation with a faculty member is a little challenging for a first-generation college student. They view the faculty member as the expert in the topic, and they sometimes feel that they lack their own self-confidence, even if they're very knowledgeable on the subject matter, to engage in a conversation with the faculty member, because that faculty member is the expert, and they don't have as much to contribute in the conversation. So once again, our challenge in higher education is, what are we doing to open up and create an environment where first-generation college students feel comfortable and ready to engage in an academic dialogue with their faculty member, and that they do have confidence and can bring discussion points to these conversations. Financial pressure is a challenging area for first-generation college students. A lot of the literature has identified that many times our first-generation college students come from a lower socioeconomic status, but that's not always the case. While our first-generation college students are very loan adverse, many times they are reluctant to even apply for federal grants, not even loans, but grants, simply because their lack of knowledge that a grant doesn't have to be repaid back. There are other challenges that are often unstated that pose additional challenges for first-generation college students. Most importantly, first-generation college students across the nation, by multiple authors, have identified that they feel like they lack a sense of belonging on college campuses. They lack a community of peers. They're wanting that. How are we, as a college campus, providing a sense of belonging and a community? Imposter syndrome is probably one of the most commonly identified challenges. There are two that I'll talk about. Imposter syndrome is the first for first-generation college students. Imposter syndrome is that lack of self-confidence. It's most routinely defined, so I'll use the Stapleton and Astoria definition. It's a disassociated state in which first-generation college students may never feel confident, grounded, or socially connected to the academic experience on campus. This imposter syndrome leads to additional multiple mental health challenges, including self-doubt, lack of self-efficacy, and decreased ability to advocate on behalf of oneself. They feel like they don't belong here. They feel like they're imposter living the college experience. What are we doing on our campuses to help alleviate imposter syndrome? When we think about families, we know that families are a huge important part of the lives of all of our college students. I could do an entire another time to talk about parents and families of college students. But when we think about our first generation college students, the family context is a particularly central reference point for first generation college students, because for them, family values are families are valued and prioritized. Continuing generation college students often use their families as a form of social capital. We've talked about this. That social capital of access to resources. Where should they go on campus? Continuing generation college students use their families as a social capital to push them through their college experience. First generation college students sometimes lack that cultural capital on college campuses, and so it's a difficult time for them to even explain the college experience. Family time and values management are two important challenges that a first generation college student must overcome to be successful in college. They're routinely pulled between this time of these two worlds that they're straddling: their college life, and how are they balancing their academic courses, as well as their family life, that a family member or a parent may not understand and know what they're experiencing. So this balance is routinely important. A first generation college student has to figure out this balance if they are to be successful. As we said, we have that opportunity to really capitalize on the family engagement of our first generation college students, because they do strive to bring honor to their families, and that's why they are choosing to attend college. Family achievement guilt, though, is routinely common in first generation college students. Family achievement guilt, much like imposter syndrome, is this concept that I'm achieving something that none of my parents have achieved before. I'm pursuing this bachelor's degree. I'm pursuing a college degree. But it's a guilt that many first generation college students feel guilty about, that I'm in pursuit of something that my parents don't have. So it's a struggle that our first generation college students must strive to overcome. The last two analogies that I'll use when we think about parents and families and first generation college students and the higher education environment is the first of this concept of push and pull. Students whose parents have at least a bachelor's degree or are continuing generation students are really pulled through their first year of college with specific advice from their parents. If you had a parent or family member who went to college, you probably at some point in time received a parent encouraging you to do this, or you should check out this resource. Our first generation college students feel more like the push rather than the pull. So while their family members are great to support them, they're pushing them, but maybe not with the specific guidance or the direction, but they are still there to support them. The last thing to think about is this notion of individualistic versus collectivistic nature. So for first generation college students, they grow up in an environment, and they've self-identified that growing up with my family, it was very collectivistic. It's all about the we. In my family, it was all about the we as I'm applying to go to college and I get admitted to college. But then they self-identified that when they arrive on college campuses, it's much more individualistic in nature. It's all about the me. It's about my grades. It's about my faculty members' teaching evaluations. It's about me getting a degree. And so for first generation college students, they often struggle in this somewhat murky zone of, I grew up in the collectivistic, the we, but I arrive on a college campus and it's more individualistic. It's about the me. So when we think about at an institution level, we know that a lot is being done on college campuses. Retention, persistence, those are buzzwords that we're hearing probably at 99.9% of colleges across the nation. And we know that there's more that we can be doing to support first generation college students. But I think the challenge is many times we find great advocates on our campuses. And we really hear that word advocate being used more and more in alignment with first generation college students. The National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, NASPA, along with the Suter Foundation, which is a private foundation out of Dallas, Texas, recently launched the first ever National Center for First Generation Student Success. And in doing so, chose the word advocacy when we think about faculty, staff, peers, the greater form of the community, really advocating for each other. So we know that there's a lot that we can do as we advocate for first generation student success. And we find those advocates on campus. We find people who are proudly wearing these "I'm proud to support first generation Tigers" buttons. But sometimes those advocates are in separate pockets. And we might think that we're trying to do this on alone. Or I like to say when I do this training a lot with many of my colleagues across the nation in student affairs, is that we're like these Legos. We're all doing our own thing and we're lined up one another. What we really need to be doing if we are creating an environment for colleges and universities to truly support first generation college students is we need to be more like the Lego hamburger here. We need to be integrated. We need to be having these conversations if we're truly going to make change for first generation college students feel more comfortable, feel more at home, and have that sense of belonging where ultimately they can succeed. So my challenge to you in this conversation right now, I've done a lot of talking for the last several minutes, but my conversation that I want to open up is, what can we do as at one institution? What can we do to really provide an environment for first generation college students feel a sense of belonging, feel part of a collectivistic nature? What can we do to support first generation college students? I'm open. Yeah.
There was a presentation at the Tilford Conference yesterday of some staff members from Washburn that have a special program for, I think it's minority, so something like that. Seems maybe restructured for their, probably a lot of it probably overlaps, but that would be one suggestion. That's
Absolutely.
kind of expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it would be cost effective or not would be a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like, so Starfish
Mm-hmm.
is a very good way of identifying at-risk students. And just kind of how you talked, first-generation college students are more likely to be at risk.
Mhm.
So I guess just trying to identify those problems earlier on and better training on just what resources are available to you. Yes, they're available to you whenever you need them. You can go, and even if that's not the right person, they will then in turn point you in the right direction. But don't be afraid to ask questions, I guess, that you need to instill in them, because you kept talking about how they have that problem. Talking
Yeah.
Maybe excuse me, maybe I missed it, but what's our proportion of first gen?
when I first started here, which was in 2012, we were about a third of the incoming class identified. We've now grown to close, not quite 50%, about 45% of our incoming class does identify as first generation. When we look at first to second year retention rates though, continuing generation college students are retained in the 70s, low 70. Our first generation college students are retained right about 50%. So there is about a 20% gap in terms of that first to second year retention rates.
So I would argue that if we are 50% are first gen, then we need to normalize that.
Mhm.
We need to not separate them out and say, here's some special programs for you, but provide it for everybody, because
Absolutely.
that's who our people are.
Right.
I mean,
I also think it's an opportunity for us to not think of first gen as a deficit anymore. I think that too often we're thinking about that as a deficit, like even just, you know, at risk or even those things. And it's something that it's now, I think that's one of the amazing things that with the center is proposing is it's a sense of pride. So how are we making students proud to identify as first generation and not that your likelihood of not succeeding in the classroom or things like that. But I would agree, normalizing it is key.
There's a lot of transition right now, but Greek life has a lot of positives in that aspect. Like, personally speaking, like my big coming into chapter was a girl I knew. We were both continuing, you know, that's everything else. But like, I mean, 2 out of the 4 littles that I have are first generation students. And part of that too is when they come to me saying, well, my mom's reacting like this. I'm struggling with my grades. I've been starfished. They're like scared. They're terrified of, you know, coming with that to their parents and everything. Or their parents, they're like, we want to check your grades. We want to know this. We want to do that. Okay, you've got to reframe it from their perspective. You know, my parents are like, okay, well, what are you doing to get that grade up? You know, what are you? Their parents come from a very, like, they don't necessarily have knowledge behind it, but they're worried, but like you said, they don't know what to point them, what resources to direct them to at all. And so it's just like, okay, she's upset with you right now, but you need to take that as motivation. Here's where you can go. And sometimes, like, if you don't have that close relationship with a student, you just know that they're struggling in your class, or you're not invested in them, like, I mean, people think it's not their place to say or step in, but
I was going to ask, because you said a third of our incoming class was, or
Mhm.
used to be, first generation students, but I'm curious about our incoming transfer students. Do we keep track of how many of them are first generation college students?
I'm sure we do. I do not have that data point right off the hand, but I think part of this, the challenging part of even tracking is it's all self-identification. So a student may not self-identify either as continuing or first generation student on their admissions application. And I think that's a larger systemic problem across the entire nation is, and I also think the definitions piece, because I have colleagues who work just down the road at other places who work with first gen programs, but they view a definition as you must be the first student to go to college, not necessarily obtain a degree. So I think those variants of definitions across the nation cause people to think about, am I not, on that self-identification.
So much of our conversation is focused on how to help these individuals fit into the system, and would it also be possible to have a conversation about how can the system change to accommodate students like that?
I think it's a great conversation. I mean, I even think back to the Plana article from the New York Times that even identified that the dean of a very elite university back east said he didn't even realize, like, even some of his initial things in class were really working against first generation students. He used the example of one of his opening icebreakers on the first day of class is having the student go around and identify, tell us what your parents do for a living. And for some of our first generation college students, they said they felt very reluctant to share that maybe there's one, I think in that case, the one person worked in a custodial job and the other one worked in a secretarial job. But it made that first generation college student feel even uncomfortable to even share in a room of other people with jobs that obviously required their parents to have college degrees. And so I think that I think that's a greater question that needs to happen, like you said, about how can we change the system to make our first gen students feel comfortable and a sense of belonging. I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's a great conversation that needs to be taking place. Yeah.
That's an interesting comment that you made. It sort of segues with what I was going to ask. I'm first generation, but I never related to any of the things that you're talking about, and I'm just wondering if this is more of a class thing, and if there's just a correlation between class and first generation. It's not being really first generation that is the root of these students' difference or problems they experience. It's just it's their class. Because my family was middle class, and so I just kind of always thought of myself sort of as my parents were the same status as college graduates, I guess, because of our income.
Yeah, it very well could be. I've not explored that intersection with socioeconomic status and generation status. It very well could be, but.
Now, after I completed my education, interestingly, in looking back, I do recall thinking, well, I wonder if it would have been easier for me, or if I could have, done better than I did if I would have had college-educated parents, because theoretically, it is easy to see where that would give you an advantage, just in the way that you were raised, and that your parents are naturally going to project a more importance of education to you, follow your studies better, encourage you, or discipline you, when you slack.
It's a great point.
Dr. Bruner, I guess
Yes.
part of, as a first-generation college student, by your definition, what we use here at Fort Hays State, I think some people might believe that the first-generation college student might be based upon ethnicity, social and economic status, much about what Bakari Sellers said yesterday at the Tilford Conference. You get categorized by your zip code. And so because of maybe where people come from, we might have an idea of what we think a first-generation college student looks like. At my previous institution, I encountered a white male from Johnson County who was first generation. Now, I think if you're a Kansan, you don't likely think of first-generation college students coming from Johnson County. And so I like the idea of now that we have more than, almost 50% of a class, that it's not that we're saying this specific group of people needs this resource, but really all of our students need this resource. I'm happy to serve as a mentor to a first-generation college student because what Dr. Bruner was talking about, I can relate to some of those things. I'm very proud to say that my mother was a cook manager for 2 of the elementary schools and my dad was a mechanic because they impacted the lives of people. I'm not so sure, I'm at that point now, but I'm not so sure how I would have felt like that as a transfer student or as a freshman talking about what my parents did for a living. So there's a lot that we can improve upon and that can help all students. It'll be interesting to see how we can make those pathways to that point.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
If I understand you correctly, that Fort Hays has a significantly higher proportion of these students than the national average? So like you said, 20%
20%.
overall, and we were, 30 to 50 or something? Okay, so we are higher.
I forgot what I was saying.
Okay, first of all, what you guys were saying about about like Fort Hays having a higher percentage of first-generation college, that really makes sense to me, I guess, because I'm a first-generation college student. My father may have earned a certificate from Hutch JUCO, but I don't. I don't even think that was a full associate's. Anyway, but yeah, because I came from that background where my father was an electrician and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, money and the cost of education, how big that leap is, how deep or how wide that is really a big. It's a big deal to me at least, and so I like knowing that really makes sense. And I guess one of the biggest ways to help, I guess, at least like faculty-wise, is just being open and being patient. I think it's like right over here, all these offices have those "please interrupt me" signs. I really like that because so many times I have so many questions, and I know I feel really, like really nervous to approach somebody to ask a question that may sound stupid or you know, or whatever. So those signs that say, you know, I don't really care what question you have to ask. It's more important than whatever it is I'm doing. I really enjoy it. So I think that's like the best thing that a college could do to adapt to people who feel the way I do.
Thank you for sharing.
You said something about partnering with K-12 more. 'Cause I'm first gen as well. My parents were farmers. But at least when I was in high school, there was a really clear track. You know, if you were this kind of a student, you were obviously going to college. And so I didn't really think of it as anything, it just seemed normal to me, even though I was the first one. I mean, I was by your definition. And there were other students who were, you know, you're on the VOTEC track or you're on the straight to a low-paying job track. You know, I don't know if that still happens.
I
and
am
if
not as
that's
familiar.
feeding into this as well.
Yeah, I am not as familiar with K-12 in terms of what that is, and a lot of the research and a lot of the articles that I have read about this have called for the need. I think it goes back to Dr. Greenleaf's comments about, you know, we as a system have to figure out how to change the system, and I think that there's a lot of calls for more partnerships between K-12 and higher ed to figure out how do we make that leap of faith not as extreme for a first-generation college student. I don't think there are a lot of practical examples that I have seen in place yet, maybe from the research that I've read, but I think it's one of the largest charges to both settings that I keep reading is there needs to be more collaboration to make sure that leap of faith is not as big a gap to jump over.
I know I've seen certain schools really make a point from the beginning of talking to the students, you know, college is in your future, your college material, and really, so that's part of their identity.
Yep. Absolutely.
I really love the way that you, in your presentation, touched on stigma, because like, I'm a very verbal, I had a very involved family, close-knit family, everything. I'm accustomed to discussing things, and if anything, like, I felt like coming into college, I was more comfortable speaking to my instructors than my peers. And any kind of differentiation between the same classroom socialization that makes you stick out, makes you feel very anxious. And I think this also, it's like how people perceive the stigma of mental health or anything. Like in college, you're going to experience anxiety or depression, depending on, you know, a whole range of things. And that's the same age gap. A lot of other psychiatric disorders emerge. But if you feel abnormal, sometimes you don't want to make yourself stick out anymore. You don't want to identify your parents as working, you know, a job that doesn't reflect the other students around you. You don't want to single yourself out.
Absolutely.
So just kind of like making that, like you said, reducing the stigma so they don't feel uncomfortable advocating for themselves while they're entering college.
That makes sense to me. I think your economic status is much more stigmatizing than your first generation status.
Mine's more of a question.
Uh-huh.
You talked about how first generation students like have a harder time with classes that are more abstract as opposed to ones that are more concrete. Is there any research as to why that is, or?
No. So the research that is found has just been more, I think the several articles I read were more qualitative studies where students were self-identifying that. They didn't go into, there were no themes that emerged why that concrete versus abstract nature, but multiple studies did identify that it was one over the other.
I'm just going to touch on that because I also made a note when we were talking about that. Do we see that reflected in their majors as well?
Yeah,
Is there
yeah.
any studies on that?
I have not seen any studies about what majors first generation college students choose versus continuing generation. I think it's a fascinating piece that I'm anxious to dig into a little bit more, but yeah, no.
So if abstract thinking is one of the main things you learn in college, it makes perfect sense that parents who had been to college would be teaching those skills the whole time the child's growing up. That certainly would easily explain, I think, that difference.
Also, the concrete classes are more closely related to, at least like to the classes I took in high school. So it's more of what it is that we know in abstract thinking is what's like not absent in high school. I didn't have a lot of classes that weren't really in that traditional like format.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Does Fort Hays offer any formal mentoring programs to students, or are there anything like that?
Yeah, so we do. So for first generation college students, we offer a variety of kind of programs and events. So the first one that we do is we offer an optional pre-orientation program for first generation college students, freshmen or transfer students. It's called Golden Beginnings, and students can choose to opt into that each year. We've grown the program, so this past year we had close to 90 freshmen and transfer students who arrived to campus 48 hours before everybody else, and so it was really that social acclimation piece. It was also giving them the skills to be successful in the classroom as well. We brought in some faculty members who identify as first generation to talk about how do you engage with your faculty members, or the process of making friends, or and really the data that we have received over the last 3 years. We've done the program now for 3 years. Is students have articulated a stronger sense of belonging, identifying friends that they still have that same common theme with. Then beyond that, then we also have a first generation faculty, staff, or peer mentor program. So any first generation college student in their first year on campus, either as a freshman or a transfer student, can elect to want a faculty, staff, or peer. We do let them identify, like, are you more comfortable with the peer? Do you want a faculty or staff member to engage in a one-on-one mentoring relationship with? Last year we had 15 students in the mentor program, and this year we have 45 students who have chosen to have a mentor. So we one of our first pieces, and when we meet with that student and kind of the intake piece, if you will, is we talk to them about, okay, so this is how to have a conversation, reaching out to your mentor, giving them the skills to be confident in reaching out to someone, their assigned mentor, to say, I'd like to, can we chat about X, Y, or Z? And we also provide some discussion prompts for them on a monthly basis. So maybe this time to talk about asking them questions about how did that faculty or staff or peer decide what their major was in college when they were going to college, or did they change their major, or how do they interact with their parents or families? So we do offer both of those programs, and then we do also have this year is our first year of having a learning community that is open for first generation college students. The Generation 1 learning community has 14 students in it, and all of them identify as first in their families to go to college. So although we've had the learning community just 1 year, the previous 2 years without a learning community, we have had a section of freshman seminar, not attached to anything else, or not attached to where people live. We've had that for first generation college students as well. And that course, they really use the This I Believe book, the NPR book, to really identify, they use that as a kind of a text to kind of walk through about what do they believe and why, and ultimately they are writing their This I Believe statement, 500 words or less, about what do you believe in life, and that's kind of been one of those guiding prompts in the culminating. So we do have all three of those programs in place to support first generation college students. The state of Kansas, the Kansas Board of Regents last year for the first time started what they call the Ad Astra Conference for first generation college students. It's hosted every year at Wichita State, and it's a 24-hour overnight conference for first generation college students from all of, last year was just the Kansas Board of Regents public or the universities. This year it's expanded to some of the community colleges as well to really bring students together across the entire state, to really bring a sense of belonging. Last year we took 9 students from Fort Hays to that conference. This year we're taking 14 students to come in an environment of learning and social building, community building with other first-gen students from across the state.
Those Fort Hays programs, are those free to the participants?
They're all completely free. My office pays for all of that.
With the first generation students, is that just the learning community? Is that just the freshman learning community, or I know they're doing sophomore learning communities now. Does that go into the
Right
sophomore
now,
year too?
the Generation One learning community is just for freshmen. As we explore some of our options in the second year experience and the sophomore experience, we're looking at what that element of first gen looks like in the sophomore experience, or even as we think about our transfer students, what does first gen look like from a transfer student perspective? But right now, we're just looking at it in this first year in the freshman standpoint. Any other thoughts or questions?
I think I have a thought.
Okay.
I really identified with first generation and also being a transfer student. So I'm trying to remember what challenges I had and problems. I think, like with people talking about majors, I think I would have liked to know more about what major I would have picked before transferring in, just because I think personally I'm doing something that I think is not challenging enough for me, and I wish I could change it, but I'm a senior now, so I'm definitely not going to do that. So I think that's just a thought I've had, and maybe in those areas we could work that out as a university.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and touching up on the whole majors thing, I think a real, at least for me, and this may or may not speak to any other first generation college student, a real deciding factor on what major you choose is how directly that translates like to a paying job. Though I'm a huge fan of music and I would love to go get like a music degree, that doesn't like necessarily translate perfect. And so that's why I'm an elementary education teacher, and so that's something that you get the degree and you can make money doing that. And so I guess along with being able to inform them of all the majors, being able to tell them this is what you would do in the real world with that degree would be super useful.
I think that's largely a myth, because all the other jobs that don't have major specialties have to hire people too. And I've even been told by several job recruiters, that what they're really looking for in a college graduate is someone who has, showed up every day, proven that they can be given a task to do, that they will complete it in a satisfactory amount of time and do it, with a certain level of that's what most employers want to know in a college graduate, that you just should demonstrate the potential to learn. Most jobs, they're going to have to teach you how to do that job. So that's what's important to them, is you demonstrate, hey, I can learn. If you just tell me what you need me to learn, I can do it.
That's the theory. I think having been an undergrad with a bachelor's degree that is not traditionally economically viable, I was a theater major, and I did go out and apply for traditional jobs as an administrative assistant and in small businesses, and they did not want a theater major. They wanted a business major. And it's not to say I didn't have all those skills, because I did. I think those recruiters who are saying, oh, we just want you to have these skills, we don't care what your major is, in reality that really doesn't pan out. Because I, was very proactive when I was an undergrad about going to the Career Center and getting my resume reviewed and going to the career fairs. And all the career fairs that I went to, it seemed like there was really no one who wanted to recruit me. So that was my personal experience. Of course, I'm not a first generation college student, but maybe if I had been, maybe I would have picked a more practical major as an undergraduate.
Well, certain jobs are. I mean, if you want to get into business, obviously business major is what, and I don't know what job you're talking about applying for.
Well,
but there's
the
a
reality
lot of
is
other
that
jobs
at
out
career
there
fairs, businesses, most of the employers that show up at career fairs are the type of careers that hire business majors. There's no recruiting for theater majors. Nobody's like, you know what, I'm gonna come to campus to a career fair because I really want a theater major. It doesn't really happen.
And I think part of that too is depending on the field that you go into, because you have to look at like the turnover in businesses now. A business isn't going to invest like 3 months of training you when they expect you to last, you know, a year or two or, you know, whatever else. Like, I had a really long-term boyfriend who was a computer science major, and if you didn't know the code language or whatever, you expected to self-start and either like know and learn that code, or, you know, if you were good enough, they were willing to work with you. But I mean, they're not going to put in a huge amount of training because you don't stay in a particular job or field. People change career areas. Maybe they don't like the degree they do. People come back for education in midlife a lot more than in previous generations because everything is so fluid. We're upwardly mobile. We can travel to a different location where there's work. That comes with a whole new set of problems. But at the same time, like, unless you want to stay in the same area for the rest of your life, and people do that, usually you pick up, you know, you supplement your income in various ways.
I had another question, kind of just on the research thing. Kind of to go along with this, if first generation students feel more pressure to go into a degree that has, like, say accounting or like something like that, that has like a clear thing at clear light at the end of the tunnel, like this is the job I'm gonna get, like if there's more of that kind of pressure because they're first generation, like they don't want to get a degree in something that they might really like and then not be able to find a job in that. I don't know, I'm not a first generation student, I don't know if there's research
In other
on
words,
that.
cost effectiveness is more important.
Yeah, like that's what
Parents
I,
want
yeah.
there to be some sort of a guaranteed return on their investment.
Yeah, that's kind of what I
That
was
makes
thinking,
sense.
if there's that kind of pressure with, so I
I
know with like me, both my parents went to college and they told me to like major in what I liked, that was what was important, was to major in what like I found interesting, so.
Yeah, I don't know if there is specific research about that, but I do think it goes back to, once again, that partnership with K-12 in terms of how are we making sure that we're providing all of that college information readily and available in a more time-efficient manner, so there's less likelihood of delaying entry, but also understanding earlier on rather than later on in the student's college experience about all of those opportunities, what majors there all are versus a very specific path. So I don't know about specifics on that research, but I think it does correlate to the lack of college information pre-college.
Sorry, to play off of that. I think a lot of that has to do with the financial security of the family situation. Because if you do consider yourself a self-supporting structure, like my older brother entered an art major, he's not working in that field at all. There was a significant amount of pressure on me if I showed an aptitude to enter, like I said, a field you can see a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a concrete job, there's decent money, there's something going on there and everything. I've since changed majors, it's still in the same realm. But my younger two siblings are entering art majors, and so in the meantime, they understand the need to support themselves. And so they went through the massage therapy program because they showed an aptitude. And in the meantime, while they're waiting for their art to take off, they can still support themselves. But, I mean, unless you like have that foresight and planning to diversify yourself and or advice from your parents, you're not necessarily going to know that's an option.
Well, I was asking her if you had talked about University 101, and I guess there's a section that's
There, so,
devoted.
yes, so, the last 2 years, prior to this year, there has been a dedicated section of University 101 Freshman Seminar, that is, it's open for anybody. We advertise it as a section for first generation college students taught by a faculty member who identified as first in her family to go to college as well. And they have used the NPR book, This I Believe, as really kind of a central text in that book, and that class really understand what do you believe in life, and then using that to formulate some value statements and belief statements at the end of the course, along with the rest of the University 101 things. Now this year, because we have the Generation 1 learning community, which is a first generation based learning community, we've rolled that section into the freshman seminar University 101 course for that community, whereas in the past it was open for anybody, if you live on campus, off campus, wasn't a learning community specific course. But we have done that over the last couple of years to really kind of provide that sense of belonging, that academic self-confidence a little bit more with a community of peers.
So this seems like University 101 would be a perfect place to weave a lot of these
Absolutely.
skills in and ideas of
Mhm.
like, so you gotta see on this paper, that doesn't mean you're not college material, or, all those kind of things that you might not learn from your family, but I don't, maybe
Yeah.
they do that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a prime opportunity, and and I go back to your comment that you made earlier about if we really are at 50% of first-generation students in our freshman class, it's normalizing it, and it's weaving all of these skills in for all of our first-year students, not just half of them versus the other half. So I think you're spot on that as an institution that has seen rapid growth with first-generation college students, it's normalizing it, it's building it in for all of our students. I would definitely agree with you there. I think we're almost out of time, so thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And if you have more buttons, if you want to take them back to your friends or your offices.